Alrighty, good evening. I hope all of you all can hear me. My name is Miss Pinkney, Miss Jacqueline Pinkney. You can call me Miss Jackie or Miss Pinkney. Thank you for joining me. I hope the volume is okay for everyone. Please let me know if at some point it isn't. I will try my best to make any adjustments for you, or anything that you need. So, if you were with us last night, actually, let me turn up the volume just in case, just to make sure. Okay. If you were with us yesterday evening, that was the start of our segment of our crash course for SAT, ACT reading. What we went over yesterday was text structures. With text structures, we saw the different types of passages that we will encounter as we approach the SAT and ACT reading. Examples of those types of passages that we would be seeing would be something from US or world literature, a US founding document, maybe something from the Constitution, something from economics, psychology or sociology, right? I find those sometimes to be easier, but that's just because I studied the humanities. I studied at a liberal arts college, so something like that is easier for me. It may not be for everyone. And then also a paired passage where you have two passages that cover the same topic, but may have the same or different perspectives. And then you are asked questions about the individual passages and then are asked to compare and contrast those passages based on the author's point of view. So, in reading these passages, we want to ask ourselves different questions. One of those questions would be about the purpose of the passage, which is why. Why did the author write, this passage? Why did the author write this? Whether it's an excerpt from a novel, as we saw, something from an article. What's the point, right? Also, we want to ask ourselves about the central theme. What is this about, right? What's this main topic? And also the style and tone, right? And I use the example of, the tone of your mother's voice. You know something's wrong when you know your mother has a certain tone whenever she's calling you, right? So, if it's, a happy tone, a serious tone, based on that, like what's going on. And it's the same concept with the passages in what we are reading for these standardized tests. So, and that answers the questions how. So we have why, what, and how. And those are the questions that we want to keep in mind as we are reading. So also we want to try to start anticipating the types of questions that the test is going to ask us. And the more you do this, and some of you have been doing this for a very long time, right? Maybe you've been preparing for these tests, since the beginning of this year, right? That is plausible, that is possible, right? And maybe some of you are new to this. You're like, look, the test is next month and I need to start somewhere, right? So, but what you will see over and over again, even though the questions, the passages, the text you're reading, the text you're reading are different, the types of questions you're going to see, as we said, it's a pattern. They're standardized. You're going to see the same thing over and over again. So as you are reading, you want to start anticipating, like, okay, so what are they going to ask me? So the types of questions that you generally will see cover, like, they're more about summary, inference, like reading in between the lines, factual, just, straight details, just going straight to the text and finding the answer, going to the line number that is indicated. Paired questions, which is new to this version of test. Before, because I started teaching this a long time ago, right? Some of you may have been in elementary school, but so you'll have a question and then it will ask you to support, like cite where you found the answer to that question, right? And sometimes it could be three together, right? And then also vocabulary and context. Those are the ones that you're going to see over and over again. So as you're reading, keep that in mind. As you're reading the information, think, could this be, what part of a question that's going to be asked? So the techniques that we're going to employ usually entail skimming and scanning. you skim a passage because we know that we don't have a lot of time whenever we are doing these standardized tests. It's not a secret, right? There's a lot of time pressure, and that actually causes a lot of anxiety, right? So the more we're prepared, the better. And using a technique such as skimming can help us get through the passages easier. Now, um, it is a technique. It isn't something that you can just do overnight. It's something that you will have to practice. So skimming can entail reading the first paragraph and then reading the first sentence of each succeeding paragraph, the first and the last, and maybe a few in between, right? Some of us can't do that, and that's okay. That's okay. Work yourself up to it. So in the beginning, if you all are new to this and maybe reading isn't your strong suit, don't depend on skimming because it may be detrimental. First, go ahead and read everything. Don't time yourself, right? Go through, and then as you practice more and more, then try to skim and skip a few lines because you're going to naturally see what's the information that's quite important. Like you're going to be able to recognize easily, okay, this sentence is a main topic sentence, it's a main idea sentence, it's something that's used to support or advance the ideas of the author, and the others is just fluff, right? But that takes time. Be patient with yourself. Also, there's scanning. So when you scan, when you go to your questions, you're going to see keywords. You use those keywords to try to identify the parts of the passage where you're going to find your answers. Also, there are 5 common patterns in terms of with these passages and with these questions. You're going to see cause and effect. You will see compare and contrast, problem solution, sequential, and description. And there's always a few things in between, right? There's always something. They're always going to throw you a curveball, right? Just be calm, right? And know that, focus on what you do know. Right? You can read. Rest assured, you can read. And so these tests make you feel and make you somehow have less confidence in the skills that you already have. Don't let them throw you for a loop. You work the test. Don't let the test work you. Okay? Your attitude is everything, right? So if you go in with the mindset, knowing that, okay, look, this is something that I have to do. This is something that I have to do for just the next 3 hours, right? For the reading part, not, in terms of the whole test, right? And you go in, get the job done, and then you're finished, right? And so don't feel like this is going to the end all be all of your future. It is not. It's just one step towards your future. So if you go in with an attitude, a positive attitude, right, then you're more likely to or going to do better, right? Psych yourself up, not down, right? Believe in yourself. So some tips, though, that we went over yesterday are one is to, when you actively reading, ask yourself these questions about, the purpose, the central theme, and or just, talk to yourself as you're reading these passages and ask yourself, what's the importance of this, right? As you're going through each paragraph. This isn't Harry Potter. Harry Potter was an easy read. You could have read that book in a day, right? You didn't have to really think. It was enjoyable. This is not enjoyable. Let's be honest. Let's face it. This is not an enjoyable task, but it's a necessary task, right? And so actively read, actively ask yourself questions about what's going on, no matter what type of passage it is, and no matter what the topic is. And then also, whenever you go to the questions, try to answer the questions for yourself. Don't be misled by the answer choices, right? The answer choices are meant to confuse you. Now, some people may think, okay, it's a conspiracy theory. Oh, they're trying to get us, right? Yes and no, right? So, but like I said, have more confidence in yourself. You read the passage, go to the questions, answer for yourself. Well, I think it's about this. And even if you're not exactly right, that's not what we're looking for. We're at least getting you to at least have a better idea of what you're looking for so that you don't get so get fooled by the answer choices because they're meant to look right? And you may have an answer choice that may be partially right, but then the rest of it's wrong. You may get excited like, oh yes, that's it. It has this. It uses the exact same word. No, no, no. Right? Not, no, that's not always the case. Answer it for yourself, then find the one that best matches your answer. And then if you're totally wrong, that's okay. And you just choose whatever the best of what you got. Look for signal words, right, as you are reading and seeing how the passage transitions throughout, right, the excerpt. And then finally, we looked at the end of yesterday at the session, we looked at 3 passages and we answered questions on the different types of passages. Okay, now let's move on to today, the purpose of the passage. Now, once again, we are looking to build the foundational skills, right? So this may be something that you have already gone over in your English classes before, right? Especially if you are part of a really rigorous program, in your high school or at part of advanced classes, honor classes, right? So this may not be new to you, but it's just a review, which is fine, right? It's good to review and to reinforce these skills. Okay. All right, then. So we ask ourselves, what is the main purpose of the passage? Now, also, I want to preface this with you may want to take notes. Even though this may be a review for you, it's good to take notes, right? Sometimes we get so confident that we miss the very simple things. So go ahead and get a notebook if you don't have one already. Get a piece of paper. You should have, it's best to be organized. Have a designated notebook or a designated space in your folder. I always take notes, have a piece of paper and write down those notes, those key things that you feel are super important, right? Not all of us need to take notes. That's fine, right? But it is suggested. So let's continue. So there's going to be a lot of reading, so bear with me, right? We have a lot of words on here, okay? But reading is just a part of life, okay? So be patient and you just enjoy the ride, okay? So, and also if you do have any questions, feel free to interact in the chat. I will try my best to keep an eye on that and to be able to answer any questions that you may have. Yesterday, we didn't have the chat. Today, we have the chat option. Hopefully, you're able to interact with me. I'm used to, and most of you are used to being able to have class, to be present in class. That's what I'm used to as well. But as you know, things are changing, technology is changing. And so we're doing things online, right? So, and we have to adapt. Okay, so let's go ahead. So if a reading passage provides facts about a particular subject or tells readers how to do something, the author's purpose is to explain or inform. If a reading passage contains many opinions or tries to get readers to do something, buy something, or believe something, the author's purpose is to persuade. This may sound very familiar to a lot of you. So what is the implied main idea of the passage? The main idea of a sentence or passage is its primary point or argument. An implied main idea is the primary point of a sentence or passage that is not clearly stated, but instead deduced from surrounding details. Traditionally, these inference types questions, reading between the lines, traditionally is quite hard for my students, whether you're a native speaker or not, right? Trying to decide what can we say for sure based on the information and the context clues provided. Sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes it's tricky because we may go based on, oh, well, I know this in real life. And it's not based on what you know. Oh, yes, I saw this documentary on National Geographic. No, it's not about you. It's not about your own knowledge base. It's not about what you've read in the past or what you've read in school or what have you in your free time. It's based on what is the information that is given in the text by the author. What can we say for sure based on what is given? What is the purpose of understanding vocabulary from the context? Because we know that's going to be one of the questions, right? They may highlight just one particular word, in the text. You have to go back and find that and see, based on, what was said, the description in that passage, what can it possibly mean? And it's normally the best answer. It's not the perfect one, and it may not be the one you like or the one you want, right? But it's the best of what we got. So, understanding vocabulary in context. When readers come across a word they do not know in a text, they use ideas in the sentence or context clues, like we said, to help them make a smart guess about the meaning of the word, right? It's I can't emphasize enough, the best of what you have there, the best of what you have. So how do you do that? You examine the context clues in a sentence or paragraph, and that will help you understand some unfamiliar words. And let's be honest, some of those words you're like, I've never seen this word. Or it's a word that you do know, and it uses a meaning that you're not familiar with. Because in the dictionary, you have multiple meanings, right? They can go as deep as 10. The definition number 10, and the SAT, ACT may use that definition number 7, right? One that you're not familiar with. So once again, just go do the best you can with the list that they give you. So how do you identify the author's purpose in a passage, right? The author's purpose answers the question, as we learned yesterday, why? What's the point? What's the author trying to tell me, right? What am I walking away with? What are the key learnings, as some people would say? In general, there are 3 basic reasons for an author to write something. You may already know. Do you know? We kind of went over it already. 1, to persuade their readers. 2, to inform their reader. 3, to entertain. Now, this is quite similar to, if some of you all have been in public speaking, right? When you're writing a speech, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're trying to convey a certain message, right? And normally the purpose in conveying your message is to persuade, inform, to entertain, right? Very basic, very basic. So, how do you find the main idea of a passage? It's easy to identify a main idea that is directly expressed in the text. Main ideas are often found at the beginning of paragraphs. So when you learn to write an essay, for me, it was in 3rd grade, right? And we are learning to structure our paragraphs. You learn that the first sentence is normally your topic sentence, right? Basic, essay writing strategies here, right? And it's the same thing. Most of the time when you're reading these passages, you will, more for informational text, I should say, for informational text, not excerpts from literature, right? Because with literature, they basically are tearing a page out of the middle of the book, right? And so it doesn't have that same structure, right? As like a story, as a novel. We know this if you are well-versed in writing your own stories. Sometimes a story just starts out of nowhere, right? And it takes a while to get at the theme and the main idea, right? So it's a little bit different. And so, but as we learned when we were in 3rd grade, or maybe it's 4th grade, maybe it's 2nd grade for some of you, the first sentence often explains the subject being discussed in the passage. Main ideas are also found in the concluding sentences of a paragraph. So what I like to do sometimes is, not to say that you need to skip the whole passage, no, but for informational text, right? When you think about it, when you learned how to write an essay, right? You have your introductory paragraph, you have your 3 body paragraphs, you have your conclusion. And what's the main point of the conclusion, right? To review the thesis. So you're going to find it. So sometimes it's good just to read the first paragraph and the last one, right? Because it sums all the ideas up, in a nice, tightly packaged, little paragraph. Because that's what you learned how to do, right? So don't forget those things that you learned when you were in elementary school. Okay, are we doing okay so far? Right, I'm sure you all had a full day, right? Hang with me now. Okay, I know it's a lot of information. So, author's purpose keywords, right? It's things that we can look at to help indicate what's going on. So we have compare, contrast, we know about that, criticize, describe, or illustrate, right? I remember when I learned how to use that word, I was like, oh, yes. Use your thesaurus, like, oh, I don't have to just use describe all the time. The author said, oh, this passage illustrates, explains, identifies or lists, intensifies, suggests. Oh, let's go back. Sorry. Because I want to review that list. So whenever you are answering questions about what the author's purpose, you're going to see these. Okay, you're going to see these, and you want to ask yourselves, you're like, okay, is the author really comparing? Is the author really identifying the differences of certain statements or certain theories, right? Is the author being critical, right? Of whether it's some sort of phenomenon or of some sort, right? Is the author just explaining and not taking a side? That can happen too. You want to be careful of that, because sometimes when we're so amped up and trying to read this, we think that the author is automatically taking a side. Sometimes the author is not taking a side. Sometimes the author is just presenting, look, this is a phenomenon, this is what's happening, or these are the theories around it, and I am just presenting what these theories are and not necessarily taking a side, right? Identifying, listing, intensify. So you want to ask yourself, is the author really doing these things, right? And so it's good to be really reflective whenever you're answering these types of questions. So now let's look at the central theme, right? When we have the central theme, that answered what? That's what we learned yesterday. Okay, what is he or she talking about? Right? Are we talking about bunnies? Are we talking about space exploration? Are we talking about the excavation of diamonds? Right? So what's going on? So how do we identify the theme? That was nice, right? How it jumped out. A theme is a central or underlying idea in a piece of work, which may be stated directly or indirectly. We said this before. Sometimes there's an implied meaning there. All novels, stories, poems, and other literary works have at least one theme running through them. The writer may express insight about humanity or a worldview through a theme. So, subject versus theme. So don't confuse the subject of a work with its theme, and it's easy to do so. The subject is a topic that acts as the foundation of a work of literature, such as marriage in the 19th century of France. A theme is an opinion the author expresses on the subject. For instance, the author's dissatisfaction with the narrow confines of French bourgeoisie marriage during that period. There may be major or minor themes. Now, some of you may feel like, wait a second, there's not enough time for all that. And you're right. In the test, the excerpt that you're getting, especially when it comes to novels, right? You're not going to be able to see all the themes in a literary work when you're just looking at an excerpt. You're looking at just a short page, a few paragraphs, right? But this is, like I said, it's just going over the basic and the foundation of, whenever we're reading a text in general, whether that's in the test or whether it's in school, right? These are the things that you should have learned in school. So there can be major and minor themes in works. So we know a major theme is an idea that a writer repeats in his work, making it the most significant idea in a literary work. A minor theme, on the other hand, refers to an idea that appears in a work briefly and that may or may not give way to another minor theme. So there could be several, right? So if we look at Harry Potter, we like that book. Well, most of us do. I loved it, right? And so maybe a major theme would be good versus evil, for example, right? You know, and that good prevails overall. But maybe some minor themes could be the importance of friendship, right? The importance of persistence, the importance of teamwork, right? When, you know, the friends were working together, you know, to defeat, the main negative, forces in the universe, right? So little things, or the importance of love, and how that helps to prevail, the importance of friendship. And some people can argue that maybe some of those were major, right? But as we said, some themes can give way to others, and some of them are quite intertwined. So reading and analyzing the work. You guys still with me? You're doing good so far. I know you had a long day. Relax, breathe. Let's continue. I told you there was a lot of reading. So before you attempt to identify the theme of a work, you must have read the work, and you should understand what? The plot, characterizations, right? And I go back to Harry Potter just because it's fun. I know that in other pieces of work they may not be as fun because, like we said yesterday, you're not reading for pleasure, right? But at least you know that even though this is a book that was read for pleasure, it still follows the structure of a literary work, of a novel, whether that's War and Peace, right? Something from Shakespeare. So they all follow the same type of structure, even if it's something that you're just reading for fun. So characterizations, other literary elements you want to identify, and then spend some time thinking about the main subjects covered in the work. So those are the things that you want to think of as you are actively reading. And as you're like, that's a lot. Do I have time for all that, right? So let me tell you, because I've been doing this for a long time, the more you do it, the more things become automatic for you, right? And especially if you had a really good English teacher, when you read something, a piece of writing, these things and these questions are going to go through your mind automatically. Right? And if you haven't done that and it's not, now's the time to start practicing so that it does become automatic. So, for example, maybe some of you practice the piano, an instrument, the oboe, right? I say that because I had a student who she played the oboe. She was an excellent oboe player, right? Or maybe you practice sports, tennis, soccer, right? In the beginning, let's face it, you weren't very good. Right? But as you practice over and over again, those things that your teacher, your instructor, your coach told you over and over again, they start to become automatic, and you have muscle memory, right? And you start doing those things without even thinking about it. So if you haven't done it before, now's the time to start. It's never too late to learn a new skill, right? This year, I just started learning 2 new languages. I'm going to tell you, I'm 40 years old, right? You're never too old to learn new skills, okay? So if I can do it, you can do it, okay? All right. Plot of the work. Let's see, do I have any questions so far? No questions, okay? All right, just checking, making sure everyone's there. Plot of the work. So write down the main literary elements, right? So this is just in general, right? This isn't like, Ms. Pinckney, I don't have time during the test, right? So, but this is just as you are practicing, right, and reading other pieces, articles and things like that. Annotating, right? Annotating is an important skill to learn as you are reading and analyzing. I still do it. I still do it. And so as I'm reading, I write down these things, right? In the test, you don't have time. So what you don't have time to actually physically annotate, you do in your mind. Okay. So write down the main literary elements: plot, what's going on, the characterization, the setting and tone. What are the things that you notice as you are reading? What's this character doing? How is he or she saying it? What is their relationship? How are they interacting? What is this author saying? Language and style. What is that? What are you noticing about the style of this author? And are there conflicts? Right? Are the characters getting along? Right? Does it seem like they're friends, or maybe they're not? Right? Is there some sort of antagonist in there that's thrown in there, even if it's a short excerpt? And then what was the most important moment in the work that you noticed? Was there some sort of a key, like a turning point of some sort? And you can put a star, a bracket of some sort, as you are doing that. And does the author resolve the conflict? In a book, that you're reading, maybe you do have time there is time to show there's some sort of resolution. But in the test, maybe or maybe not, right? It may just be you're kind of like you're left hanging. To say, oh, wow, this wasn't really resolved, right? There isn't really some sort of concluding statement. Sometimes there isn't, okay? And that's okay. That's okay. And how did the work end? So identify the subject of the work. If you were to tell a friend about the book or passage, what would you say? Right? You can't just take a piece of paper and just read the whole thing over and over again, right? Word for word. No, you have to learn how to summarize and take out the main details on your own. How would you describe that? What would you say? Who's the protagonist? How does he or she change throughout that excerpt? Does the protagonist affect the other characters? And how does the character relate to the others? Maybe it's just one person reflecting, right? Or interacting with one or two others. Also, assess the author's point of view. Determine the author's view toward the characters and the choices that they make. What might be the author's attitude toward the resolution of the main conflict? What message might the author be sending us? Once again, these are things that you should have learned in school in your English class as you are reading a book, right? And when you have time, I have a book here. Right. This has many, many pages. You don't have time to read all of these pages in a test, but the fundamentals of how you approach the text are the same. They're the same. I promise you, as I'm reading this text, I am annotating. I am annotating in this text. No matter how long or short the text is, you should be doing the same. You should be actively thinking and reflecting about the text so that it's easier for you to recall details. So when you find out what the theme is, you will find clues in the language used, in quotes from the main characters or the final resolution of the conflicts, right? You're identifying the style, the tone, all of those things that we talked about before. So some key terms. We have theme, right? The main idea that connects all the elements of the narrative. The plot, the action that takes place over the course of the narrative. The moral, a lesson that the reader is intended to learn from the plot's conclusion. Also, there could be some symbolism, the use of a particular object or image to represent something larger. And I go back to Harry Potter because I love it, right? So when we think about the phoenix, right, the bird that Dumbledore had, that, that bird symbolized something. When you think about rebirth, something dying and then coming back to life, that symbolized Harry, right? In the end, sorry if you haven't seen it, I'll ruin it for you. He died, but then he was able to come back to life. when we think about some things being destroyed and then coming back to life again, being reborn anew, fresh, right? That bird symbolized other things that were happening in the story. Okay, so do we have any questions over what we went over? I'm going to look in our chat box. Doesn't seem like we have any questions. It seems straightforward, I know. So now we're going to dedicate the last part to practice. Okay, we have about 24 minutes left. Okay, so we're going to look at some text and we're going to talk our way through it and, answer some questions, of course, at the end. Okay, so now this is a preface to what we're reading. Frederick Douglass, this is a narrative here, narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. He wrote a book. So we're going to read an excerpt from that and then decide what are the main things going on there. So here's some basic information about him, some background information about him. Frederick Douglass, 1818 to 1895, was born into slavery in Maryland. As an adult, he escaped into freedom. He became a writer, orator, and advocate for the abolition of slavery. In 1845, 16 years before the start of the Civil War, Douglass published his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. In this passage from chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, Douglass is a 10-year-old slave. Okay, so some of you like to read to yourself, which is fine. I'm going to read aloud, right? And then also voice, what I'm thinking as I'm reading this. And maybe this is something that you do as well. So I want to model active reading. Hopefully this is clear for you. Okay, so in a very short time after I went to live at Baltimore, my old master's youngest son, Richard, died. And in about 3 years and 6 months after his death, my old master, Captain Anthony, died. 2 deaths close together, leaving only his son Andrew and daughter Lucretia. Okay, 2 people left to share his estate. He died while on a visit to see his daughter at Hillsborough. Cut off thus unexpectedly, he left no will as to the disposal of his property. That can be problematic. When there's no will, right? There can be fights sometimes and who gets what. It was therefore necessary to have a valuation of the property that it might be equally divided between Mrs. Lucretia and Master Andrew. Okay, that's normal, right? When someone dies, the heirs, they have to divide up the property. What is left, they have to divide it equally, right? Especially if there's not a will. I was immediately sent for to be valued with the other property because slaves were viewed as property. They weren't viewed as human beings. Here again, my feelings rose up in detestation of slavery, all right? So we're seeing now how he felt as a person with these events, these things happening to him. I had now a new conception of my degraded condition. Prior to this, I had become, if not insensible to my lot, at least partly so. So maybe he had learned to kind of live with his situation, right? But then once the master died, right? And it was time to divide up the property, and he had to go through that process of being evaluated as property. It brought up these feelings in him of how much he hated being a slave. And it kind of made him confront those things that he was maybe able to kind of ignore before, right? And it was just kind of brought to his face. I left Baltimore with a young heart overborne with sadness, and a soul full of apprehension, hesitation. Remember, he's 10. It's a lot for a 10-year-old. I took passage with Captain Rowe in the schooner Wildcat, and after a sail of about 24 hours, that's a long time. Wow, okay. I had found it hard just being in a plane for 10 hours. Imagine being, in a boat for 24. I found myself near the place of my birth. I had now been absent from it almost, if not quite, 5 years. So maybe he was sold off when he was 5 years old. I, however, remembered the place very well. I was only about 5 years old when I left it to go and live with my old master on Colonel Lloyd's plantation, so that I was now between 10 and 11 years old. We were all ranked together at the valuation. Men and women, old and young, married and single, were ranked with horses, sheep, and swine. Imagine being, put together with a whole bunch of animals, farm animals. You know how they smell. They stink, right? And then to be viewed as just like them, animals. There were horses and men, cattle and women, pigs and children, all holding the same rank in the scale of being, and were all subjected to the same narrow examination. Now, the fact that he's pointing this out shows how significant this is, right? He could have just said, oh, we were sold. We were sold and that was that. No, he's pointing out how significant, how this really affected him, how all these people put together weren't really people. They were animals, the same as farm animals. And they were looked at, evaluated, treated in the same way. Silvery-headed age and sprightly youth, maids and matrons had to undergo the same indelicate inspection. When you think about animals being inspected, right? Imagine that happening to you. And try to visualize, right? At this moment, I saw more clearly than ever the brutalizing effects of slavery upon both slave and slaveholder. All right, so now we have some reading comprehension questions. So I hope as you were reading, and you probably read it faster than me, which is fine, right? I read it slowly, right, to kind of, as I said, to help you to engage in the text and also to help model what types of questions or things that you should be saying as you're reading so that it's easier to answer these questions. So why did Douglas go to Baltimore? Answer for yourself. Do you remember? Do we need to go back to the text? Let's go. Right? So he was sold there, right? Okay. He went there after his birth. How did Douglas and the other slaves view Master Andrew? What can we say? We'll probably have to infer that, right? So if we go back to the text, bear with me. Okay, so Andrew was the son, right, of the master. Captain Anthony, he had died, so we left his son Andrew and Lucretia, right? And then they had to be sold off, right? They had to be evaluated, right? So there probably was some sort of resentment, right? Some bitterness, some sadness, as it said, some unhappiness there. Detestation we saw there in the text, right? We see in the second paragraph. Let's see if I can write here about how they're viewed and ranked just like the horses, sheep, and swine, right? Same rank. Subjected to the same narrow examination. So there's nothing there pointing directly to how they felt about, the master, right? But we do see some clear language about how they felt about what happened after the captain died, right? After the master died, and what happened to them as a result, right? In the passage, Douglas explains that slavery was humiliating. Cite text from the passage that clearly supports this idea, right? And we just saw it, right? We just pointed that out, those things in the paragraphs. We can go back to that again. Sorry if that's making you all dizzy as I go back and forth, right? What I just marked there. Okay. We have here here again, my feelings rose up in detestation of slavery. Degraded condition. And once again, what we had pointed out there. Okay. Indelicate. Oops, go back. Sorry, I'm going to go through this again. Get my pen right here. Indelicate inspection, brutalizing effects. So we know not positive, right? We don't see any positive words here. Oh yes, I like, being sold as a slave. I'm with the sheep and the horses. No. Okay. That was very clear there. Find one additional text example that also supports the idea that slavery was humiliating. I think we found them all. It was very clear. Okay. So was that problematic? Wasn't so bad, right? Okay. Let's continue. Read the passage carefully and answer the following questions. Okay. Passage 1. Okay. Once again, I'm going to read this. I know some of you don't like having someone in your ear. That's fine, but I want to model for you my own thought processes and something that you could also do as you are reading, right? So that you're not just passively reading, but you're actively reading. After years of such strenuous critical work, the mind becomes molded in a certain cast. Now, this is something totally different. We're done with Frederick Douglass, okay? It is impossible for me to put aside the habit of the literary critic as it would be for a hunter who had spent his whole life in the woods to be content in a great city. So when I started out on this trip around the world, the critical apparatus which I had used in getting at the heart of books was applied to the people and the places along this great girdle about the globe. So traveling, right? Years of critical work, analysis, literary critic, going around the world, evaluating things. Much of the benefit of foreign travel depends upon the reading that one has done. For years, my eager curiosity about places had led me to read everything printed about the Orient and the South Seas. Add to this the stories which were brought into a newspaper office by globetrotters and adventurers, and you have an equipment which made me at times seem to be merely revising impressions made on an earlier journey. So, read a whole lot, always curious about things, right? Read things in books and newspapers, right, about different things happening in the world. When you talk with a man who has spent 10 or 20 years in Japan or China or the Straits settlements, you cannot fail to get something of the color of life in those strange lands. So you learn something when you speak to people from different parts of the world, right? Especially if you have the newspaper training, which impels you to ask questions and to drag out of your informant everything of human interest that the reader will care to know. So if you're trained as someone, as a as a journalist, right, you naturally are going to ask certain questions. You're naturally going to be curious about certain things. You're going to want to know a whole lot more than what the person is just providing. You're going to ask follow-up questions. This newspaper instinct, which is developed by training, but which one must possess in large measure before he can be successful in journalism, seizes upon everything and transmutes it into a copy for the printer. So, as this person is talking with people, he or she is automatically thinking, how can I write this into a story? How can I make this, newsworthy? To have taken this journey without setting down every day my impressions of places and people would have been a tiresome experience. What seemed labor to others who had not had my special training was as the breath in my nostrils. So it was natural to this person to do that. To someone else, they're like, oh my gosh, this is so exhausting. But for this person, what it says, that newspaper instinct. me see if I can underline that. That newspaper instinct, something natural that you do without even thinking. Okay. It wasn't tiresome for this person. Even in the debilitating heat of the tropics, it was always a pastime, never a task. Never a task. It's not a job to put into words my ideas of the historic places which I knew so well from years of reading and which I had just seen. This person enjoys it. He lives and breathes it. And the richer the background of history, the greater was my enjoyment in painting with words full of color a picture of my impressions. Look, this person loves doing this. It's like, oh goodness, all this information. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to cross that out. So all this information, it's wonderful. For the benefit of those who are not able to share my pleasure in the actual sight of these famous places of the Far East. So being able to write about these places and to share them with others, to be able to paint a picture for other people brings this person sheer joy, genuine joy. Okay, the primary purpose of the passage is to, what do you think? This person's a journalist and is sharing how wonderful it is to be a journalist, how maybe for other people it's a drag, it's boring, it's tiresome, but to this person, it is as natural as breathing, right? So describe the benefits of traveling to the Orient and the South Seas, or just demonstrate the advantages of pursuing a career in newspaper editing. What do you think? A or B? Okay. Explain how one person's background influenced that person's outlook and actions while traveling. Do we like this? Or define the term newspaper instinct and illustrate strenuous nature of a writer's life. Well, that tells me, because he wasn't saying it was very strenuous, right? Okay. This, if we were to decide between these two, what would you say, right? Because this is too general, advantages of pursuing a career in newspaper editing, because he's not really focusing just on newspaper editing itself, though this person really enjoys it, right? But it's not just saying, oh, here are the pros and cons, right? So maybe this is too specific, though that mentions this, right? So I can see why we would want to be drawn to this. But then explain how one person's background, when he talks about, you know what, my training as a journalist makes it natural for me to be able to glean and take out, the all of these details, right? And so in listening to these people from these different places makes them be able to naturally paint a picture for others and to explain this experience in vivid detail. So there we go. Passage 2. Let me see how much time we have. Okay, we have about 6 minutes. Okay. So here's our other passage. You still with me? We're almost done. Hang in there. Okay. Are we rising again? So this is totally something different. Okay. All right. We're shifting gears. Shift with me. Okay. Are we rising again? No. On the contrary, are we descending? Worse than that, Captain. We are falling. For heaven's sake, heave out the ballast. You may not know what that is, but that's okay. If they're falling, something's going wrong, right? There, the last sack is empty. Does the balloon rise? No. I hear a noise like the dashing of waves. The sea is below the car. It cannot be more than 500 feet from us. Overboard with every weight, everything, right? So of course I'm reading this with some emotion and some feeling. You might as well, right? And so when you're reading these things, imagine like this is a movie and you're painting a picture, just like that journalist in the last passage, right? What's going on? It sounds like it's like SOS, help, something's going wrong. We're about to sink. Something, okay? We're at sea. I don't want to drown, right? Such were the loud and startling words which resounded through the air above the vast watery desert of the Pacific. about 4 o'clock in the evening of the 23rd of March, 1865. So it seems some sort of narrative. Someone is narrating their experience, in 1865 on the Pacific. Few can possibly have forgotten the terrible storm from the Northeast. So some sort of memory, right? In the middle of the equinox of that year, was said 1865, right? The tempest, the storm, raged without intermission, without stopping, from the 18th to the 26th of March. Whoa, wait, what? 18th, 19th, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So like 9 days of storm? That's a lot. How they survive? Its ravages were terrible in America, Europe, and Asia, covering a distance of 1,800 miles. What is this? El Nino? This is terrible. And extending obliquely to the equator from the 35th north parallel to the 40th south parallel. So it's talking about, whenever you're on the globe, the longitude, latitude thing, the latitude. This is longitude, this is latitude, right? Towns were overthrown, forests uprooted, coasts devastated by the mountains of water which were precipitated on them, vessels cast on the shore. This was a mess, which the published accounts numbered by hundreds. Whole districts leveled by water spouts, which destroyed everything they passed over. You know what this makes me think of? The fires in California. I know it was in water, but when you think about devastation, that is devastation, right? So sometimes it's good to kind of relate it to something that you know of, heard of, right? To have some sort of association. Several thousand people crushed on land or drowned at sea. Ooh, such were the traces of its fury. Think fury, think madness. And this was mad. Oh my goodness. Left by this devastating tempest. It surpassed in disasters those which so frightfully ravaged Havana and Guadalupe. Havana, that's in Cuba, right? And Guadalupe, I believe that's in Mexico. One on the 25th of October, 1810, and the other on the 26th of July, 1825. But while so many catastrophes were taking place on land and at sea, a drama not less was being enacted in the agitated air. Oh no, what happened? Lord have mercy. In fact, a balloon, as a ball might be carried on the summit, right, of a waterspout, had been taken into the circling movement of a column of air and had traversed space at the rate of 90 miles an hour, turning round and round and it seized as if seized by some aerial maelstrom. You know what that makes me think of? A tornado. Ooh, any of y'all lived through a tornado? Awful. I lived in Kentucky for 12 years. In the Midwest, we got tornadoes, right? Things circling that's what I think of, column of air, and it just going and taking everything and ruining everything in its path, and you not knowing where it's going to go and what it's going to hit. Beneath the lower point of the balloon swung a car, containing 5 passengers, scarcely visible in the midst of the thick vapor mingled with spray which hung over the surface of the ocean. Oh, Lord. This is scary. Whence, it may be asked, had come that plaything of the tempest? Where did it come from? From what part of the world did it rise? It surely could not have started during the storm, but the storm had raged 5 days already, and the first symptoms were manifested on the 18th. It cannot be doubted that the balloon came from a great distance, for it could not have traveled less than 2,000 miles in 24 hours. I don't know where this monster came from. This was something. All right, then. So we read all that. I know it was quite animated when I read that. Did you see what was happening? Did you see it? Yes, I saw it. Whew, that was something. Okay. The primary purpose of the third paragraph is to describe the damage that the storm caused in Havana and Guadalupe, discuss a series of incidents that occurred in a hot air balloon, set up a comparison between events occurring on land and at sea and in the air, trace the cause of a storm that killed several thousand people in uprooted forests. Okay, sorry, we have to go back. That was a lot, right? I'm like, oh, we have to go all the way back. Hold on, I know. All right, so that's the first one. Then we have the second one. Third one, right? So that's when we learned about how long it lasted, the devastation, on land, on the coasts, right? People had drowned, right? And then it did say that such were the traces of its fury left by this devastating tempest. Sorry, let me write that. It surpasses disasters, those which so frightfully ravaged. So it does mention Havana and Guadalupe, right? When they happened. Okay, but all this is talking about this devastation and how unforgettable it was. Okay, I think I see ravages, right? Where it was said overthrown forest, forest uprooted, coast devastated, right? Whole districts leveled. Oh, a lot of stuff was going on. Okay, so let me look at that again. Hold on, I know. So is it just describing the damage that the storm caused in Havana and Guadalupe? Be careful, those were mentioned, but it's not talking about the damage specifically in those places. There was a comparison, though. Discuss a series of incidents that occurred in a hot air balloon. Careful, all right? Set up a comparison between events occurring on land and at sea, in the air, okay? Trace the cause of a storm that killed several thousand people and uprooted forests, right? So most likely this, okay? What the author says about this, sorry, there's a typo. What does the author say about the storm? Oh, it was terrible, right? It's unforgettable. It was devastating, okay? Discuss events occurring in the air, that the storm raged without intermission, the storm ravaged without intermission. That's about the same, right? Contrasting events occurring in land and sea, right? Okay. Gosh, we're about done. Oh, well, we're already 3 minutes over. Okay. And we are done. Okay. All right, then. So I hope you enjoyed this little segment. Okay. Please don't forget those things that we learned. We will continue tomorrow. All right. Have a good evening. Have fun with math.